Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this episode, we're going to keep looking at validation, and we are taking off where I left off. So here we have our form, and we're only validating this first text field at the moment. So what else can we do, right? So imagine if we want to copy this first name rules, right? And let's remove this white space here, and let's call this last name rules, right? And let's say last name is required and last name has to be less than 10 characters. I'll remove this actually, this 10 character thing, since we already have a counter here. So that will be fine. So now we can take, there we go. Let's take this and let's take our last name rules and put them in here. Cool. So refresh, is it required? Yes. So one thing I'm actually going to fix is I don't like it that it's not instantly validating this. So I'm going to go to the text field. I'm going to grab this watcher we have here, so value, and I'm going to assign it to an object like so. I'm going to say that handler is going to be this function here, and immediate is going to be true. Okay, so let's refresh this, and cool. So it's validating it straight away. Nice. So let me come back to this up here. Let me refresh this. Okay. So starting point. We have these two fields that we want to validate, right? So let's say we want to submit our form. Yeah. So we'll say something like submit, right? If this dot form valid, right? So this is something that we want to do, but due to this sort of situation we have here, so we have these inputs. So how do we go about preventing somebody submitting the form and grabbing validation status from this field here? Okay, so let's delete the submit, right? And let's say validate, all right? So, and this is not actually, I don't want to make this a computed. This is something I just want to call right now, so we can basically validate it, have control of over when we're validating. So let's make a button and let's say validate, and let's say if I can change the, yeah, validate. Okay, so we have this button and we're calling validate. Okay, so how can we access these children? So first of all, we can go this dot children. So view makes it real easy for us to what's it called, take a look at all the children, all the children components, right? So let's press validate, and what do we have? We have 5 components in here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Cool. So that seems to be correct. Now, what do we want to grab? All right. If we go to the text field and we want to grab only the components that have this valid data, right? Because otherwise, if it doesn't have a valid, we're not going to be able to validate it, right? So if we go into one of these view components, we can see right here, some of these are props and some of these are data and some of these are computed properties. So essentially props, values, and computed properties can be accessed through the child straight away. So if we go to 0 and we grab the valid status right here, so let's refresh and validate. First name is required, and if we type something in and validate again, it's going to return true. All right, so now that we know that basically we can access the valid property of each input, this gives us a bit of a bit of an idea of what we want to do. So let's make a for loop. Let I equals 0 and I is less than this dot children dot zero. One thing we might want to do, actually no, never mind. Let's just do it this way. So I cool, and let's remove this array here. So we're gonna basically children dot length. All right. So for every child, we want to go into I, and let's actually grab the whole child at this point, and let's say let child equal this. All right, and we will say let's create a data field form valid, and let's say from starter will be false. Okay, and let's say this dot form valid equals child dot valid. Now, one thing I want to mention is we want to ignore the property, we want to ignore the children that don't have the valid property. So essentially there it's going to be undefined. So if it's undefined, form is valid because we're ignoring that. Or child dot valid equals true. Okay, so let's do this dot form log. So let's console log it for now, and let's validate. So we have true, false, true, true. And if we remove here, we should get false, false, true, true, true. Okay, cool. So essentially false, false, true, true, true. So for our last three components, this is always going to be true. So what we want to do is say, so we don't override our values with true just like we did inside of our text field components. What we want to do is if this dot form valid. So if it's not valid, let's just jump out of this and keep it at the invalid status. So let's see this. Let's print this out actually. Form valid. Okay, so false. Cool. So we can validate our form, but we have no reactivity. So if this changes, we cannot detect this automatically if it's valid or not. So how do we go about doing this? Well, in Vue, you can create dynamic watchers. So this is what this is going to be about. We're going to be creating dynamic watchers. So let's go to created, all right? And this is going to fail because I just want to make a point about lifecycle hooks. So let's go to console.log this children. Okay, so you see we get an empty array here. If we do expand it, we get these things here, but essentially these components are not going to be created when this parent is created. So the flow is the parent component is created, then the child components are created, and then the parent component is mounted. So we actually want to do is we want to call mounted, and this is where we're gonna actually, let's take this and let's cycle through our children here, right? And actually, never mind. I don't want to do this. What I want to do is I want to take this dot children, and I want to first get rid of everywhere where we have the valid doesn't equal undefined, right? So everywhere where valid is anything but undefined, we want to keep those. So essentially saying valid has to be some sort of a value, like it has to be present. Right, so at this point we will have first these two fields. Let's go ahead and continue. For each of these fields, we want to take this child and we want to create a watcher. Okay, and we want to watch the valid value. All right, and once the value is changed, let's take this value and let's apply it to a function. So first of all, let's go ahead and console log v. So we and let's call it custom watcher, and let's just say info. Okay, let's say something changes. Okay, custom watcher true. All right, and if we go to if it goes back to invalid, so basically anytime the status has changed, we get to know basically if these inputs are valid or not. Cool. So what is possible to do with this? Next thing, what we want to do is we want to create a reactive array, or basically let's make an array that's essentially is going to be errors. Yeah, I want to call it errors. And what I want to do is I want to take this dot errors and let's do it the wrong way first. So one thing I want to mention is let's also log, before we do this, let's log the child again, and I want to bring your attention to one of the properties of the child, and that will be the UID. So this is a unique ID that every component in Vue is unique to it. So this is essentially a setting your key value, but this UID is unique per child. Okay, so we can use that as a key to store in this errors. So what we want to do is take this UID and use it as a key in the array. So one thing, it will not work when you do it with an array, and because that's how it works with objects. So objects are essentially key value pairs, not arrays. Or maybe a map, I'm not sure. Maps are key value pairs. And so yeah, let's carry on. So you have this, we have this errors, and at this position, we want to say v. All right, now again, this is going to fail, and I just want to explain the situation, right? And the situation is that if we try to display errors right here, right, you can see that this code is getting triggered, right? And this should essentially be appending to this errors, but it's not actually changing anything, okay? I would say actually no, never mind, it does, but you see the first time that it does it, the change doesn't happen. So let's go ahead and fix that. Let's go to this, and we can access a set method. And what we're going to say is, right, let's take this object here, right? And for key UID, so this is going to be the key, essentially what we placed in our square brackets, and the value that we want to put in there, right? So this is going to start basically watching for changes straight away. So if we type something in, let's refresh this. Okay, so you see the first time now that when we type something in, the change is taking effect straight away, right? And that's because when you add a property first time, you have to add it this way. Otherwise, the first time that you add it, it's not going to be bound straight away, or like basically updated and go through the update cycle where it gets rendered. All right, so we went through all of that. Now what? We need to somehow create a validation state, right? So now that we know that we are basically watching errors, we can use this in our computer properties. So let's go ahead and create a form valid computer property. And we already have this property defined on our data, so let's actually comment out this validate here. And this form valid. Yeah, let's comment this out as well. Now, what we can do is, because what we store in this error is basically the value. So it's either going to be true or it's going to be the error message, right? So for now, let's go ahead and return this dot errors, right? And let me just refresh this because I am derping around. Let's remove this validate. Okay, so we'll essentially just have two errors fields. Okay, so, and if we have one, if we have two, there we go. So basically this errors. So what we want to take are the values. So object values, let's pass in this error. So here we pass in the errors, and we want to grab the ones, so we want to grab the ones that are not true, right? So if there are any errors, let's grab them, okay? So we're gonna filter this array because at the moment, let's just again see the difference. Fresh. So you can see they're true at the moment and last name required. So it's this array on the top, so either true or last name required. And what we want to say is we want to say filter error, or rather let's say value because it's value at this point. And if value doesn't equal true, then it's an error, right? So this is not immediate. So the same as you do with any watcher, you can basically say immediate true. Let's refresh, and here we go. We immediately get the validation messages, and our what's it called error fields get filled out immediately. So form valid. At the moment, it returns a list of errors. So let's actually rename this to error list, and let's return just that. And next we can say is form valid, and here we can return this dot error list dot length more than 0, right? So now gracefully we can create a button and we can call submit, and we can say vf whoa, vf form valid, right? So let's refresh, and this should not be true, right? So it's valid only if it's 0, right? Not as graceful, but nearly there. So let's type something in. Rather, is it? Okay, never mind. I was watching the wrong thing. But basically, let's type in first name and last name. Okay, cool. So now we're basically watching the state of our form. Let's remove all this dirt we have here. So methods, let's remove the method here. Cool. Right, so we have our rules. We have the state for the form. And later on, I'll show you how to reuse this in its own form component. But for now, this will be it for this episode. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I know it might have been a little bit jumpy, but this sort of stuff can be a little bit hard to explain. Um, and you won't really understand it unless you went out and read the explanation like 10 times, because every single time you read it, it has a different meaning. But yeah, thanks for watching. As always, if you like this episode, like, subscribe. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll try to answer them all. And as always, see you in the next episode.